The Atlantic was a wall of black ink, hiding the jagged teeth of the reef until the very last second. The Santa Maria did not groan. She shattered. A sound like 1,000 dry branches snapping echoed through the hull as the keel ground against stone, throwing the crew from their bunks. The ship lurched, tilting violently to the port side, throwing crates and barrels into the rising surf. Christopher Columbus lunged for the railing, his hands gripping the cold, slick wood as the deck angled toward the abyss. Below, the roar of rushing water drowned out the shouts of the men. They scrambled to patch the breach, stuffing canvas into the jagged tiers. But the ocean poured in faster than they could bail it out. The ship groaned, a deep, metallic vibration that rattled the teeth of every man. Then, the tilt became a slide. The stern rose, the bow dipped, and the Santa Maria surrendered to the current. Within minutes, the surface of the Atlantic smoothed over, leaving only floating debris and the silence of a history that would never be written. The wreckage settled into the silt, and the Atlantic returned to its ancient, undisturbed rhythm. No other sails appeared on the horizon. No flags followed to claim the western shores. The ocean remained a vast, uncrossed barrier, a liquid desert that swallowed the ambition of the Old World. Centuries drifted by like slow tides. In the west, the land breathed without the pressure of foreign arrival. Forests grew dense and deep, unchecked by the demands of colonial expansion. The soil remained rich, unturned by the heavy plows of distant empires, and the air stayed clear of the smoke. Without the arrival of new diseases or the hunger for silver, the indigenous nations followed their own internal logic. The continent existed in a state of total isolation, a world unto itself. The barrier of the sea held firm. Across the vast woodlands of the north, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy began to weave its disparate nations into a single, unbreakable cord. It did not happen through the edge of a blade, but through the rhythm of the council fire. Leaders from the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca gathered, their voices rising in a deliberate, measured cadence. They sat in the dim light of the longhouses, passing the shell bead belts from hand to hand, each bead a physical anchor for a shared memory or a binding law. This was a government built on the weight of the spoken word. Every decision required the consensus of the elders, a process that demanded patience and the ability to listen until the conflict dissolved into agreement. They mapped their territory not with fences, but with the reach of their influence and the strength of their alliances. As the decades passed, the Confederacy expanded its reach, integrating new voices into the circle of the great law of peace. The power resided in the collective will of the people, expressed through the smoke of the council fire and the steady, rhythmic pulse of their oral traditions. The cities did not conquer the forest, they climbed into it. Massive stone foundations were laid deep into the earth, supporting frameworks of seasoned cedar and oak that rose to meet the high branches. Architects carved dwellings directly into the massive trunks, connecting them with suspension bridges woven from sturdy vines and treated bark. These structures moved with the wind, swaying in rhythm with the trees themselves. There were no paved roads to scar the landscape. Instead, travel occurred along elevated walkways that mirrored the natural paths of the forest canopy. Below, the ground remained a sanctuary for wildlife. Water was managed through gravity-fed channels, carved from stone and lined with moss, directing mountain runoff into cisterns hidden within the vertical architecture. Light filtered through the leaves, dappling the stone-inlaid plazas that sat suspended 50 feet above the forest floor. These were not static monuments, but living, breathing extensions of the woodland. The air remained cool and damp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. Far to the south, the Pacific coastline bristled with the arrival of foreign sails. Ships anchored in the shallow bays, their crews preparing to probe the rugged cliffs that guarded the Andean interior. They did not expect the speed of the response. Runners stationed along the high ridges signaled the approach with smoke by day and fire by night. Before the first landing party could secure a foothold on the rocky shore, the mountain garrisons descended the steep slopes with practiced precision. The Inca forces did not meet the invaders in open water. They waited for the tide to trap the boats against the jagged reefs. Archers positioned on the cliff faces rained down obsidian-tipped arrows, turning the shoreline into a wall of resistance. Every attempt to penetrate the mountain passes was met by a coordinated blockade of boulders and spear-wielding defenders. The ships eventually turned back toward the horizon, leaving the coast undisturbed. The Andes remained a fortress, isolated and impenetrable. High in the mountains, Cusco sprawled across the valley floor like a map etched in stone. The city was a masterwork of masonry, where granite blocks were fitted with such precision that no mortar was required. Thin veins of gold were hammered into the seams of the walls, catching the sunlight and turning the city into a shimmering beacon against the dark peaks. This was not merely a center of power, it was a hydraulic marvel. Thousands of stone-lined terraces climbed the surrounding slopes, creating a vertical landscape of green. Engineers had diverted glacial streams into complex channels that snaked through every district. The water flowed in a constant, controlled rhythm, cascading from the highest terrace down to the lowest basin. This system fed the millions who lived within the city walls, ensuring a harvest that never failed. Grain stores were carved into the mountainside, kept cool by the altitude and ventilated by stone shafts. In the central plazas, the sound of rushing water provided a constant backdrop to the movement of the people. It was a metropolis that breathed with the mountain, a self-sustaining engine of stone and water that defied the harshness of the high altitude. Inside the administrative chambers of Cusco, the empire was calculated not in ink, but in tension and knot. Scholars sat in rows, their fingers moving with rhythmic precision across strands of dyed fiber. Each knot represented a specific quantity, a harvest yield, or a census count. These quipu were the memory of the state, portable and durable, capable of being rolled and carried across the most treacherous mountain passes. A runner arrived at the plaza, his lungs burning from the ascent, and handed a fresh bundle to the waiting archivist. The new data was integrated instantly. The knots tightened to lock the information into the imperial record. This was a living network, stretching from the coastal lowlands to the highest alpine pastures. The empire functioned as a single, synchronized organism, held together by the silent, knotted language of the strings. Thousands of miles away, the shipyards of the Ming dynasty hummed with the sound of adze against teak. Massive hulls, longer than any structures on land, rose from the dry docks like wooden cathedrals. The focus of the empire had shifted from the northern frontiers to the horizon of the Indian Ocean. Thousands of ships, their sails dyed in deep ochre, moved in disciplined formations, catching the monsoon winds. Navigators stood at the prow, their eyes fixed on the stars and the subtle shifts in current, mapping the vast expanse. From the ports of East Africa to the islands of Oceania, a web of trade routes solidified. Cargo holds were filled with porcelain and silk. In the bustling harbors of the Indian Ocean, the arrival of the treasure fleet was a daily occurrence, a pulse of activity. The ocean was no longer a barrier, it was the primary highway, a vast blue theater where the Ming dynasty orchestrated the movement. Deep in the heart of the Sahara, Timbuktu stood as a fortress of intellect and commerce. The air in the city squares was heavy, with the scent of desert dust and drying ink. Caravans arrived daily, their camels laden with slabs of salt and heavy leather pouches of gold. Yet the true currency of the city was found in the libraries. Scholars sat on woven mats in the shade of mud brick walls, their hands tracing lines of Arabic script on vellum. A merchant paused his trade to listen as a philosopher argued the nature of justice, the two men exchanging ideas with the same intensity they applied to the price of gold. This was the Mali Empire, where the pursuit of knowledge was as vital as the extraction of wealth. The city functioned as a global clearinghouse for philosophy, science, and theology. Every caravan that departed for the Mediterranean or the southern coast carried not just precious metals, but scrolls of astronomy, mathematics, and law. Timbuktu did not merely trade in goods, it exported a vision of human progress rooted in dialogue and inquiry. As the sun set over the desert, the city glowed with the quiet industry of 1,000 pens, a beacon that drew thinkers from across the continent. Across the globe, the map had ceased to be a singular, unified entity. Instead, the world functioned as a mosaic of distinct, self-sustaining regional civilizations. There were no sprawling, standardized industrial grids connecting the continents, nor were there the familiar, repetitive chains of commerce that once defined a globalized market. In the Americas, the Haudenosaunee managed their forest canopy with a precision that left the wilderness intact, while the Inca maintained their terraced mountain empires through a complex, localized network of quipu records. These societies thrived by deepening their roots in their specific geographies rather than expanding outward to conquer. Technology followed this path of divergence. Metallurgy, astronomy, and ecological engineering were refined to serve the immediate needs of each region, prioritizing stability over the extraction of fossil fuels. A traveler moving from the bustling, gold-rich centers of Africa to the timber-integrated cities of North America would find no shared language of industry, but rather a profound difference. The planet was quieter, slower, and deeply fragmented by design. Each civilization operated as a closed, healthy loop, producing what it needed and trading only for what it lacked. The history of human progress had been written in local dialects, creating a global landscape where the absence of a single, overarching system allowed for a diversity of life. While the rest of the world flourished in self-sustaining abundance, the kingdoms of Europe remained trapped in a cycle of persistent want. Without the influx of silver and crops from across the Atlantic, the continent had become a collection of fragmented, resource-strained territories. In the northern reaches, the soil had grown tired, yielding less with every passing season. Granaries stood empty by midwinter, and the silence in the villages was broken only by the wind rattling through unmaintained stone walls. Technology here had stalled, locked in a desperate struggle for basic survival. There were no grand irrigation systems or vast libraries. There was only the daily labor of trying to coax life from exhausted land. A traveler crossing the borders of these petty states would find roads that had crumbled into dirt tracks, connecting towns that had not seen a new building in generations. Famine was not an occasional crisis, but a constant, looming shadow. While empires elsewhere mapped the stars and refined their ecological engineering, these kingdoms looked inward, consumed by the mechanics of scarcity. Beyond the borders of the struggling kingdoms, the planet breathed with a different rhythm. Because the vast wildernesses of the Americas were never subjected to the systematic clearing of colonial expansion, the Earth remained a massive, living lung. Millions of acres of ancient forest canopy remained unbroken, stretching across continents like a deep, green sea. These forests acted as a global thermostat, sequestering carbon and maintaining a climate that stayed cool and predictable. There were no massive plumes of industrial smoke to choke the horizon, nor were there the heat-trapping scars of concrete cities. Instead, the air remained crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles. The hydrological cycles remained undisturbed. This was a planet defined by its biological resilience. The temperature remained steady, spared from the spikes of a warming world. The world was thriving in a state of ecological balance, where the great forests were never felled for the sake of global industry. Human ingenuity took a different path, one that bypassed the burning of ancient carbon. Without the reliance on fossil fuels, the world turned its collective focus toward the mastery of metals and the movements of the heavens. In the great workshops of the Inca and the Ming, artisans perfected alloys that were lighter, stronger, and more durable than any forged in an industrial furnace. They treated metallurgy as a sacred science, refining ores with focused heat and precision, creating tools that lasted for centuries rather than years. Simultaneously, the study of the stars became the foundation of global coordination. Massive observatories, built from stone and polished bronze, tracked the celestial cycles. Engineers prioritized the flow of energy through water and wind, designing intricate systems that harnessed the natural power of the landscape without scarring it. They built machines that operated in silence, powered by the kinetic energy of mountain streams or the steady rotation of the Earth itself. The result was a civilization that achieved complexity through harmony rather than domination. The tools of this age were designed to understand and amplify its inherent potential. Look across the horizon of this world, and the most striking feature is what is missing. There are no jagged silhouettes of skyscrapers piercing the clouds, no sprawling concrete grids that sever the earth into sterile blocks. The cities do not dominate the landscape, they dissolve into it. In the heart of the Haudenosaunee territories, dwellings are woven into the forest canopy, crafted from stone and timber that mirror the surrounding groves. There is no asphalt to seal the soil, no humming power lines to tether the sky. Instead, the infrastructure is entirely ecological. Water flows through terraced channels that double as irrigation for the crops, and paths follow the natural contours of the hills, worn smooth by generations. The lack of digital grids means the world is not tethered to a central signal. Information moves through the physical world via quipu knots and oral traditions. This is a deliberate choice of design. Engineers here do not build to conquer the terrain, but to integrate their structures into the existing biological flow. There is no artificial glow at night, only the soft light of the stars reflecting off stone masonry, marking a civilization that grew alongside nature. For weeks, the only reality was the rhythmic pulse of the ocean against the hull. The Polynesian navigators relied on the stars, the swell of the currents, and the flight patterns of seabirds to guide their vessels. Then, the air changed. It carried the scent of pine needles and damp earth, a sharp contrast to the endless salt spray. A lookout stood at the prow, eyes fixed on the gray veil of the morning mist. Slowly, the fog began to fray. A jagged line of cliffs emerged, rising steep and dark from the churning surf. The navigators held their breath. No industrial ports marred the rugged edge of the continent. It was a silent, verdant wall of ancient forest. The vessels slowed, the crews lowering their sails as they drifted toward the shallows. They had found the edge of the map, and what lay beyond was a mystery that would change their world forever. The navigators waded through the surf, their feet sinking into sand that held no trace of oil or debris. As they pushed past the tree line, the expected wild, impenetrable thicket gave way to something far more deliberate. They stepped into a grove where the fruit trees were spaced with rhythmic precision, their branches heavy with harvest. This was not a wilderness left to chance. It was a landscape curated by hand. Every stream had been diverted into stone-lined channels. They found clearings where the ground was carpeted in edible tubers and medicinal herbs, arranged in patterns that maximized growth. There were no scars of excavation, no pits from mining, and no charred patches from factory runoff. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flora. Indigenous nations had spent thousands of years refining this balance, pruning the canopy to invite light and managing the undergrowth. The navigators stood in the center of a vast, thriving garden, witnessing a world where the land reached its full, untamed potential. The meeting happened in a clearing where the light filtered through the canopy in soft, golden shafts. The local people emerged from the trees, their movements fluid and unhurried. They did not speak in a tongue the navigators knew, nor did they look for a common bridge of trade. Instead, they shared a song, a rhythmic cadence that rose and fell with the wind. The navigators listened, realizing the melody held the history of the soil, the cycles of the rain, and the names of every plant in the grove. This was the true record of their progress. It was not stored in cold, static ledgers, but lived in the breath and the tongue of the people. Each valley, each mountain range, and each coastal inlet possessed its own unique dialect, a precise tool for describing the specific world they inhabited. There was no need for a single universal language to flatten the complexity of the earth. The navigators watched as the locals demonstrated a method of grafting branches to increase yield, explaining the process through gestures and precise localized terms. Every word was a testament to thousands of years of observation and refined wisdom. They understood then that the world had not failed to unify. It had succeeded in diversifying. Human achievement was not measured by the reach of an empire, but by the depth of the connection between a community and its home. The silence of the forest was filled with the richness of 1,000 different stories. The navigators sat by the fire, the crackle of dry wood the only sound for miles. They had spent months navigating the open ocean, a life defined by the constant, aggressive motion of waves and the relentless demand of the wind. Here, the world possessed a different pulse. It was a slow, deliberate rhythm that matched the turning of the seasons rather than the ticking of a clock. They watched the local people move through their tasks, each action performed with an economy of effort that suggested a deep, ancestral familiarity with the geography. There was no rush to extract, no urgency to consume, and no frantic race to expand. The continent breathed in cycles of growth and rest, a vast, interconnected organism that prioritized longevity over speed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the landscape seemed to settle into itself, the mountains and valleys anchoring the sky. The navigators realized that this stillness was not an absence of progress, but the result of a profound, long-term commitment to the land. Each continent on this planet held its own unique soul, a distinct character forged by the specific soil, the particular stars above, and the generations who had walked the same paths. The world was a mosaic of these quiet, self-sustaining regions. Above them, the constellations traced the same paths they had for millennia, unobserved by the frantic eyes of empires that never rose. The navigators looked down at the dark, fertile earth, realizing that history here was not carved into monuments of stone or written in the blood of conquest. It was written in the soil, in the precise placement of every stone, and in the alignment of the stars that guided their ancestors home. This was a humanity that had chosen the slow, enduring rhythm of harmony. They had traded the reach of the sword for the depth of the root. As the embers of the fire faded, the silence of the continent felt like a promise. It was a world that had not been broken by the hunger for more, but preserved by the wisdom of enough. In the quiet, they finally understood that the true measure of progress was not how far one could travel, but how deeply one could belong to the place they called home.